Chapter 1. The Whispers in the Walls. The dust motes danced in the single ray of sunlight piercing the gloom of the hallway, each a tiny, mocking star in my personal firmament of despair. It's funny, isn't it, how beauty can coexist with rot? The decaying grandeur of Blackwood Manor was a testament to that paradox. My inheritance, a legacy of shadows and whispers, a place they said was safe. They're always wrong, aren't they? They are always, always wrong. They, in this instance, were the lawyers. Stern, tight-lipped men in immaculate suits who seemed more like undertakers than legal representatives. They presented the will with an almost apologetic air, as if embarrassed by the burden they were placing upon me. A burden of bricks and mortar, of twisted histories and unspoken dread. The lawyers explained that the estate had been in my family for generations, passing down through a lineage riddled with eccentric recluses and whispered rumors of, well, let's just say things best left undisturbed. A fresh start, Mr. Thorne, the senior partner of Mr. Abernathy, had intoned, his voice a low, resonant drone. Blackwood Manor offers an unparalleled opportunity for solitude, reflection. His carefully chosen words did little to mask the underlying implication. You're a mess, Daniel. Go bury yourself in the country and maybe, just maybe, you'll salvage what's left of your sanity. Sanity, such a subjective term, isn't it? What is sanity but a shared delusion agreed upon by the majority? And what happens when the majority starts to question the delusion? Or worse, what happens when you question it? My sanity, if it could even be called that, had been fractured long before I crossed the threshold of Blackwood Manor. The accident, God, the accident, I try not to think about it. Sometimes the only way to survive is to simply not remember. But memory is a treacherous thing, like a restless tide, always pulling at the foundations of your mind. I came to Blackwood seeking refuge, a place to rebuild the shattered pieces of my existence. A new life. The manor was nestled deep within the sprawling, gnarled arms of the Redwood National Park, a geographical isolation promising complete severance from the world that had so brutally broken me. The air here is thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal aroma that both soothes and unsettles. It felt ancient. The real estate agent, a bubbly, overly enthusiastic woman named Brenda, had gushed about the manor's rustic charm and unmatched potential. I'd barely listened, my gaze fixated on the looming silhouette of the house against the overcast sky. Even in its dilapidated state, Blackwood possessed a strange, magnetic pull. It felt familiar, as if some forgotten part of me already knew this place, as if I were returning to a home I never knew I had. Brenda left me with the keys and a stack of brochures promising local attractions, hiking trails, quaint cafes, and historical landmarks, none of which held the slightest interest for me. As her car disappeared down the long, winding driveway, I was left alone. Utterly, completely alone, with nothing but the manor and the whispering redwoods for company. The house itself is a gothic monstrosity, a chaotic amalgamation of turrets, gables, and stained glass windows. The stone facade is stained with decades of accumulated grime, and ivy, like grasping claws, creeps across the walls, slowly consuming the structure. The front door, an enormous slab of oak reinforced with iron, groaned in protest as I pushed it open, releasing a gust of musty air that tasted of damp and decay. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of mildew and something else, something indefinable, yet deeply unsettling. It was the scent of secrets, of things long hidden and best left undisturbed. Shadows clung to the corners of the rooms, refusing to yield to the weak sunlight that filtered through the grimy windows. Dust lay thick on every surface, a tangible representation of the years of neglect. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet and the distant rustling of the wind through the trees outside. The previous owners had left everything behind, their belongings scattered throughout the house like relics of a forgotten civilization. Antique furniture, draped in faded velvet, stood like silent sentinels guarding the secrets of the past. Portraits of stern-faced men and women, their eyes following me as I moved through the rooms, lined the walls. Their identities were unknown, their stories lost to time, yet I felt an inexplicable connection to them, a sense of shared history and shared sorrow. I spent the first few days simply wandering through the house, exploring its labyrinthine corridors and countless rooms. Each room held a new discovery, a new fragment of the manor's history. In the library, I found shelves filled with ancient tomes, their leather bindings cracked and peeling. In the ballroom, a grand piano stood silent and neglected, its ivory keys yellowed with age. In the attic, I unearthed a collection of antique dolls, their porcelain faces cracked and chipped, their glass eyes staring blankly into the void. It was the type of stuff that would set most people on edge. I found it calming. The deeper I delved into the house, the more I felt a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the decay or the oppressive atmosphere. It was something more subtle, more insidious. I started to hear things. Faint whispers just at the edge of my hearing, as if someone were trying to communicate with me from the other side of the wall. Scratches, like tiny claws dragging across the floorboards above me. And the feeling, the constant, unnerving feeling that I was being watched. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, the product of stress and isolation. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The scratches became more frequent, more deliberate, and the feeling of being watched intensified, morphing into a chilling certainty. The house was alive, and it was talking to me. Yesterday, I found a journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my room, a room I chose because it was the furthest I could get from the stairs. The pages are brittle and yellowed, filled with spidery handwriting and faded ink. It appears to be the diary of one of my ancestors, a woman named Eliza Blackwood, who lived in the manor in the late 19th century. Her entries are disturbing. She writes of strange occurrences, of unsettling dreams, of voices in the night. She claims that the house is haunted, that it is possessed by some malevolent entity that feeds on the sorrow and despair of its inhabitants. It watches, she wrote in one entry, her words trembling on the page. It waits, and it whispers, always whispers. I know what she means. I hear the whispers too. I should leave, I know that. I should pack my bags and run as far away from this place as possible, but something keeps me here. A morbid curiosity, a perverse desire to understand the darkness that lurks within these walls, or perhaps something more sinister, a feeling that I am meant to be here, that I am part of some grand, terrible design. Last night I couldn't sleep. The whispers were incessant, swirling around me like a suffocating fog. I got out of bed and wandered through the house, drawn by some unseen force. I found myself in the library, standing before a large, antique mirror that hung on the far wall. The mirror was dusty and cracked, its surface reflecting a distorted image of the room. As I stared into the mirror, I saw something move in the reflection. A fleeting shadow, a flicker of movement just at the edge of my vision. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew it was something more. Something was in the house with me, and it was getting closer. Just now, as I sit here writing this, I heard it again. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It seemed to come from inside the walls, a sibilant murmur that slithered into my mind like a venomous serpent. Daniel, it whispered, come home. Home, this rotting tomb, this prison of shadows. I don't understand. But I will. I have to. I'm beginning to think that Mr. Abernathy was right. I am a mess. I do need solitude. The only thing he got wrong was where I should look for them. And now, the house will help me find them. Chapter 2. Eliza's Confession. Sleep evaded me like a phantom, dancing just beyond my grasp. The whispers, emboldened by the night, had escalated into a cacophony of murmurs, sighs, and indistinguishable utterances that seeped through the walls, the floorboards, and into the very marrow of my bones. Each rustle of the wind through the ancient redwoods outside sounded like a hushed conspiracy, every creak of the house like a footstep drawing closer. I sought refuge in Eliza's journal, the brittle pages my only source of what? Comfort. Perhaps not comfort, but a semblance of understanding. Her words were a lifeline in this churning sea of madness, a flickering candle in the oppressive darkness. I reread her entries, searching for a clue, a pattern, anything that could shed light on the entity that haunted Blackwood Manor. Eliza's initial entries were mundane, detailing the everyday life of a wealthy Victorian woman, social calls, embroidery lessons, and the trials and tribulations of managing a large household. But as the journal progressed, a subtle shift occurred, a creeping sense of unease that mirrored my own experiences. She began to write of strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, doors opening and closing without explanation, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. I feel its presence in every room, she wrote in one entry, dated July 18, 1888. A cold spot that lingers even in the warmest weather. It watches me, I know it does, its gaze like a weight upon my soul. As the months passed, Eliza's entries became increasingly frantic, her handwriting erratic and her thoughts disjointed. She spoke of nightmares filled with shadowy figures and grotesque creatures, of voices whispering her name in the dead of night, and of a growing sense of paranoia that consumed her waking hours. "They say I'm losing my mind," she wrote on October 31, 1888. "My husband, bless his heart, believes I'm suffering from a nervous ailment, but I know the truth. It's not me who is mad, it's the house. It's alive and it's feeding on my sanity." Eliza's attempts to rationalize the events were heartbreaking. She consulted doctors, clergymen, and even spiritualists, but none could offer a satisfactory explanation. Some dismissed her claims as mere hysteria, while others suggested more unconventional remedies. "Dr. Ainsworth recommends laudanum," she wrote with a shaky hand. "He claims it will calm my nerves and quiet the voices, but I fear it will only silence me, leaving me defenseless against the darkness that surrounds me." It was then that I noticed a pattern, a subtle connection between Eliza's experiences and my own. She, too, had been drawn to the library, to the ancient mirror that hung on the wall. "The mirror," she wrote on December 24, 1888. "It calls to me in my dreams. I see things in its reflection, things that are not there in reality. Shadows, figures, grotesque distortions of my own face. I fear it is a gateway, a portal to some other realm." My heart pounded in my chest. I had seen the shadow in the mirror. Was it the same entity that had tormented Eliza all those years ago? Was Blackwood Manor trapped in a time loop, destined to repeat its horrors for eternity? The most chilling entry of all was dated January 1, 1889. It was written in a desperate, almost illegible scrawl, as if Eliza were racing against time to record her thoughts before it was too late. "I know what it wants," she wrote. "It wants me. It wants my soul. It wants to consume me to become me. It whispers promises of power, of knowledge, of eternal life. But I know its true nature. It is a parasite, a leech that drains the life from everything it touches. I must resist. I must fight. I must not let it win." The entry ended abruptly, with a large, ink-blotted stain that obscured the final words. The rest of the journal was blank. Eliza Blackwood had vanished without a trace, her fate a mystery lost to the ages. As I closed the journal, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room seemed to spin, the shadows deepening and swirling around me like a vortex. I stumbled to my feet, my head throbbing, my senses overwhelmed by the oppressive atmosphere of the house. I had to get out. I had to escape the whispers, the shadows, the suffocating sense of dread that threatened to consume me. I stumbled through the hallway, my hand outstretched, groping for the front door. But as I reached for the handle, I heard a voice, a soft, melodious voice that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Daniel," it whispered, "where do you think you're going?" I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The voice was familiar, yet alien. It was both comforting and terrifying, like the echo of a forgotten memory. "Who's there?" I stammered, my voice trembling. The voice chuckled, a low, seductive sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't you recognize me, Daniel?" it purred. "I've been waiting for you for a very long time." I turned slowly, my gaze sweeping across the hallway, searching for the source of the voice. But there was nothing there. Only the shadows, the dust motes, and the oppressive silence of Blackwood Manor. Then I saw it. In the mirror. Standing behind me, just at the edge of my reflection, was a figure. A woman, tall and slender, with long, dark hair that cascaded down her back. Her face was pale and ethereal, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. "Eliza." "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with honeyed menace. "Welcome home." I recoiled in horror, stumbling backward until I collided with the wall. The figure in the mirror smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that revealed a row of sharp, predatory teeth. "Don't be afraid," she said. "I'm not going to hurt you. I only want to help you, to show you the truth." "The truth," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "What truth?" "The truth about Blackwood Manor," she said. "The truth about your family, the truth about yourself." She reached out her hand, her fingers long and slender, beckoning me closer. "Come, Daniel," she said. "Let me show you." I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to escape her grasp. But I was paralyzed, trapped by her gaze, her voice, her irresistible allure. I took a step forward, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. "That's it, Daniel," she said, her voice growing softer, more seductive. "Come closer, closer." As I drew nearer, I saw something shift in her eyes, a flicker of something dark and malevolent. Her smile widened, revealing more of her teeth, until her face was twisted into a grotesque parody of humanity. "Soon," she whispered, "we will be one." Suddenly, a piercing pain shot through my head, a blinding agony that sent me crashing to my knees. I clutched my temples, screaming, as images flooded my mind, fragmented memories, distorted visions, and a growing sense of dread that threatened to shatter my sanity. The voice laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that echoed through the house. "It's time, Daniel," she said. "It's time to come home." Then everything went black. Chapter 3: The Garden of Graves. I awoke on the cold, stone floor of the hallway, my head throbbing, my body aching in every joint. The house was silent, eerily so. The whispers were gone, the shadows had retreated, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a strange, unsettling calm. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs wobbly, my senses disoriented. The mirror was still there, hanging on the wall, its surface reflecting my own pale, haggard face. But Eliza was gone. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by stress and sleep deprivation? I desperately wanted to believe that, to cling to the fragile hope that my sanity was still intact. But deep down, I knew it was real. Eliza was real, and she was still here, somewhere within the walls of Blackwood Manor. I stumbled to the library, seeking refuge in the familiar comfort of the ancient tomes. I ran my fingers along the cracked leather bindings, searching for Eliza's journal. But it was gone, vanished without a trace. Panic began to set in. I ransacked the room, tearing through books, overturning furniture, desperately searching for any sign of the journal. But it was no use. It was as if the house itself had swallowed it whole. I staggered out of the library, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had to get out of the house. I had to escape this madness before it consumed me completely. I threw open the front door and stumbled out into the fresh air, my lungs burning with the sweet, earthy scent of the redwoods. The sun was shining, casting long, dappled shadows across the lawn. The world seemed normal, peaceful, almost idyllic. But I knew better. I knew that the darkness was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to reclaim me. I needed to clear my head, to regain some semblance of control. I decided to explore the grounds, to familiarize myself with the landscape that surrounded Blackwood Manor. Perhaps, in the process, I could find some clue, some explanation for the horrors that had befallen me. The grounds were vast and overgrown, a tangled wilderness of towering trees, thorny bushes, and gnarled vines. The formal gardens, once meticulously manicured, had long since succumbed to the relentless advance of nature. Roses, once vibrant and fragrant, now grew wild and thorny, their petals faded and decaying. Statues, once proud and imposing, were now covered in moss and lichen, their faces eroded by the elements. As I wandered deeper into the grounds, I came across a small, overgrown path that wound its way through the trees. Curiosity piqued. I followed the path, pushing aside branches and stepping over fallen logs. The path led me to a clearing, a hidden glade shrouded in shadows, and in the center of the clearing I saw it. A graveyard. It was a small, secluded graveyard, hidden away from the main house, as if deliberately concealed from view. The tombstones were old and weathered, their inscriptions eroded by time and neglect. Some were broken and toppled, lying scattered on the ground like forgotten relics. A chill ran down my spine. I recognized the names on the tombstones. Blackwood. They were all Blackwoods, members of my family, their lives cut short by illness, accident, or something else. I knelt down before one of the tombstones, my fingers tracing the faded inscription. Eliza Blackwood, beloved wife, and mother 1865 889 rest in peace. My heart skipped a beat. Eliza, this was her grave, but the dates, they didn't match. According to her journal, Eliza had vanished in January of 1889, but this tombstone claimed she had died that year. What had happened to her? Had she been murdered? Had she taken her own life? Or had she simply succumbed to the madness that had consumed her? I stood up, my head spinning, my mind reeling with questions. I had to know the truth. I had to uncover the secrets of Blackwood Manor, no matter the cost. As I turned to leave the graveyard, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A small, freshly dug patch of earth near Eliza's tombstone. It was barely noticeable, concealed beneath a layer of fallen leaves and decaying branches. But it was there. Curiosity overriding my fear, I knelt down and began to clear away the debris. As I brushed away the last of the leaves, I saw it. A wooden box. It was a small, ornate box, intricately carved with images of roses and thorns. It was old, weathered, and covered in dirt. My hands trembled as I lifted the box from the ground. It was surprisingly heavy, as if filled with something substantial. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. What was inside? What secrets did this box hold? Taking a deep breath, I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single object. A mirror. It was a small, handheld mirror, its silver frame tarnished with age. The glass was cracked and cloudy, its surface reflecting a distorted image of my own face. As I stared into the mirror, I saw something move in the reflection. A fleeting shadow, a flicker of movement just at the edge of my vision. I blinked and it was gone. But then I heard it. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It seemed to come from inside the mirror, a sibilant murmur that slithered into my mind like a venomous serpent. "Hello, Daniel," it whispered. "Welcome home." I recoiled in horror, dropping the mirror to the ground. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, scattering across the graveyard like shards of broken dreams. As the pieces settled, I saw something in the reflection of the broken glass. A face. A pale, ethereal face with long, dark hair and burning eyes. Eliza. She smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that revealed a row of sharp, predatory teeth. "Now you see," she whispered. "Now you understand." Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The trees swayed, the tombstones rattled, and the air filled with a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The graveyard was coming alive. and it was hungry. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, as the ground opened up before me, revealing a gaping chasm filled with darkness. A hand reached out from the darkness, a skeletal hand with long, bony fingers. It grasped my ankle, pulling me toward the abyss. I screamed, my voice lost in the cacophony of the graveyard's awakening. Then I fell. Chapter 4: Echoes of Madness. The fall was a disorienting plunge into absolute darkness. The air grew thick and heavy, laden with the stench of decay and damp earth. I flailed wildly, clawing at the unseen walls, but there was nothing to grasp, nothing to slow my descent. A primal scream tore from my throat, a desperate cry against the encroaching oblivion. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the fall ended. I landed on a soft, yielding surface that cushioned the impact but did little to alleviate the terror that coursed through me. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself to a sitting position and attempted to get my bearings. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating void that pressed in on me from all sides. I could see nothing, hear nothing, feel nothing but the cold, damp earth beneath me and the frantic pounding of my heart. Where was I? What was this place? I reached out my hand, groping blindly in the darkness. My fingers brushed against something soft and yielding. I recoiled in horror, pulling my hand back as if I had been burned. What was it? Gathering my courage, I reached out again, my fingers tracing the contours of the object. It was fabric, soft, decaying fabric. Then I realized what it was. Clothing. I was surrounded by clothing. Piles and piles of discarded clothing strewn haphazardly across the floor. Dresses, coats, shirts, trousers, all made from decaying fabric, all stained with dirt and grime. The stench of decay intensified, filling my nostrils with the cloying aroma of rot and mildew. I gagged, struggling to suppress the urge to vomit. Then I heard it. A sound, a faint, rustling sound that seemed to come from the darkness around me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The rustling grew louder, closer, until it sounded like dozens of unseen creatures scurrying through the piles of clothing. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. "Is anyone there?" The rustling stopped. The darkness was silent once more. Then I heard it again. A whisper, a soft, sibilant whisper that seemed to slither into my mind. "Daniel," it whispered, "you're home." I screamed, scrambling backward through the piles of clothing. I had to get out of here. I had to escape this nightmare before it consumed me completely. I stumbled blindly through the darkness, my hands outstretched, groping for an exit. But there was nothing there. Only the piles of clothing, the stench of decay, and the haunting whispers that echoed through the darkness. Then I tripped. I fell forward, landing heavily on the ground. As I struggled to regain my footing, my hand brushed against something hard and smooth. I reached out and picked it up. It was a skull. A human skull. Its empty eye sockets stared up at me, mocking my terror. Its teeth grinned in a silent, macabre smile. I dropped the skull as if it were a burning coal. I screamed again, my voice echoing through the darkness. Then I heard it. Laughter. A soft, melodious laughter that seemed to come from all around me. "Don't be afraid, Daniel," a voice purred. "They're all friends here." The voice was familiar, too familiar. "Eliza." "Where are you?" I cried out, my voice trembling. "Show yourself." The laughter grew louder, more hysterical. "I'm everywhere, Daniel," she said. "I'm in the walls, I'm in the shadows, I'm in your mind." Suddenly, the darkness began to recede, slowly revealing my surroundings. I was in a large, cavernous chamber, its walls lined with shelves filled with bones. Human bones. Skulls, femurs, ribs, vertebrae, all neatly arranged on the shelves like trophies. The chamber was illuminated by a soft, ethereal light that seemed to emanate from the bones themselves. In the center of the chamber, standing before a large, antique mirror, was Eliza. She was no longer the ethereal figure I had seen in the hallway. Her face was gaunt and hollow, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. Her long, dark hair was matted and tangled, her skin pale and translucent. She was a ghost, a specter, a creature of darkness. "Welcome to my home, Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with honeyed menace. "Or should I say our home?" I stared at her in horror, my mind struggling to comprehend the reality of what I was seeing. "What is this place?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "What have you done?" "This is the Blackwood family crypt," she said, her voice growing louder, more triumphant. "A place where we Blackwoods can rest in peace together, as one, forever." She gestured to the shelves lined with bones. "These are my ancestors, Daniel," she said. "My family. They have been waiting for you for a very long time." She turned to the mirror, her gaze fixed on her own reflection. "I was trapped here, Daniel," she said, "bound to this house, to this family, to this endless cycle of madness. But now I have found a way to break free." She turned back to me, her eyes burning with an intense, feverish light. "I need a vessel, Daniel," she said. "A body to inhabit, a soul to consume. And you are the perfect candidate." She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched, her fingers beckoning me closer. "Don't be afraid, Daniel," she said. "This will only hurt for a moment." I recoiled in horror, stumbling backward until I collided with the wall. "Stay away from me," I screamed. "I won't let you." Eliza laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that echoed through the crypt. "You have no choice, Daniel," she said. "You are a Blackwood, and you are destined to join us." She lunged at me, her skeletal fingers reaching for my face. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. Then I heard a voice. A new voice, a voice that was both familiar and alien. "Daniel," it shouted, "wake up." I opened my eyes. I was no longer in the crypt. I was back in my bedroom, lying in my bed, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. The house was silent, eerily so. Had it all been a dream? Chapter 5: The Unraveling. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, my body drenched in a cold sweat. The remnants of the nightmare clung to me, a suffocating residue of terror that lingered long after the images had faded. The bones, the crypt, Eliza's gaunt face, it all felt so real, so visceral. Was it a dream? Or was it a glimpse into the horrifying reality that awaited me? I got out of bed and cautiously approached the window. The sun was shining, casting long shadows across the overgrown grounds. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, utterly mundane. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the world around me was merely a flimsy facade, a deceptive veil that concealed a darker, more terrifying truth. I went to the mirror and looked at my reflection. I looked normal. The shock of the night had faded, leaving only a lingering exhaustion etched into my face. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to clear my head, to make sense of the chaos that had been unleashed within me. As I stared into the mirror, I noticed something. A subtle shift in my eyes, a fleeting flicker of recognition, a faint echo of the burning light that I had seen in Eliza's eyes. Was I losing my mind? Was the house, or whatever inhabited it, already beginning to corrupt me, to twist my perception of reality? I had to know. I had to find out what was happening before it was too late. I decided to revisit the graveyard, to see if the horrors of my dream had any basis in reality. As I walked through the grounds, the sense of unease intensified. The whispers were back, faint but persistent, swirling around me like a ghostly embrace. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. I reached the graveyard. The clearing was just as I remembered it, shrouded in shadows and silence. But something was different. The freshly dug patch of earth, where I had found the mirror, it was gone. The The ground was smooth and undisturbed, as if nothing had ever been buried there. I knelt down and ran my hand across the earth. It was cold, damp, and devoid of any trace of the recent disturbance. Had I imagined it all? The mirror, the fall, the terrifying vision of the crypt. Had my mind, already fractured by trauma, finally shattered under the weight of isolation and fear? I stood up, my legs trembling, my head spinning with doubt. I had to believe what I saw, what I felt. I knew deep down that something was wrong. The house was alive and it was toying with me. Then I saw it. Near Eliza's tombstone, a single blood-red rose lay on the ground. It was impossibly perfect, its petals unfurled, its fragrance sweet and overpowering. I had not seen it before. There was no rose. I picked up the rose and held it to my nose, inhaling its intoxicating scent. As I did so, a wave of dizziness washed over me, and my vision began to blur. I stumbled backward, clutching the rose in my hand. The graveyard seemed to tilt, the trees swaying, the tombstones blurring. Then I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. A woman, tall and slender, with long, dark hair that cascaded down her back. Eliza. She smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that revealed a row of sharp, predatory teeth. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice soft and seductive. "I knew you'd come back." "What do you want?" I cried out, my voice trembling. "Why are you doing this to me?" "I want you, Daniel," she said. "I want to save you." "Save me?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "From what?" "From yourself," she said. "From the pain, the suffering, the emptiness that has consumed you. Join me, Daniel. Let me show you the truth." She gestured toward the graveyard, her hand sweeping across the weathered tombstones. "Here in Blackwood Manor we are safe," she said. "We are together, we are forever." I shook my head, trying to resist her allure. "I don't want to be with you," I said. "I don't want to be trapped here. I want to be free." Eliza's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed, and a flicker of something dark and malevolent crossed her face. "You have no choice, Daniel," she said, her voice hardening. "You are a Blackwood, and your destiny is here." She took a step toward me, her eyes burning with an intense, feverish light. "Give yourself to me, Daniel," she said. "Let me show you the way." I recoiled in horror, but it was too late. The rose in my hand began to wither, its petals turning black, its fragrance turning rancid. A piercing pain shot through my head, a blinding agony that brought me to my knees. Images flooded my mind, fragmented memories, distorted visions, a sense of overwhelming dread that threatened to shatter my sanity. I saw the crypt, the bones, Eliza's smiling face. I saw my own face, contorted with fear and despair. I saw myself embracing the darkness, surrendering to the madness that had consumed the Blackwood family for generations. Then everything went black. I awoke again in the library, lying on the floor amidst a scattering of ancient books. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The rose was gone. The voices were silenced. The chaos had retreated, leaving behind a chilling sense of emptiness. But something was different. I reached up and touched my face. My skin felt cold, clammy, almost smooth, as if something had changed. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The antique mirror hanging on the wall, reflecting my own distorted image. I stared into the mirror and saw a face that was no longer entirely my own. My features were still there, but they were altered. The eyes, the lips, the cheekbones, they had taken on a subtle, yet unsettling, resemblance to Eliza. And in the depths of my own eyes, I saw a flicker of the burning light that I had seen in hers. I was changing. The house was changing me. I stumbled backward, my hands clutching at my face, as if trying to tear away the encroaching darkness. "No," I whispered, my voice barely a sound. "This can't be happening." But it was. I could feel the transformation taking place, the insidious creep of the madness that had haunted the Blackwood family for generations. The house was winning, and I was lost. Chapter 6: The Mimic. The reflection in the mirror was no longer a comfort but a torment. Each time I dared to look, the subtle alterations were more pronounced, the features of Eliza Blackwood slowly but surely eclipsing my own. My eyes held her manic intensity, my lips curved with her predatory smile. It was a slow, agonizing erasure, a gradual surrender of my identity to the entity that haunted Blackwood Manor. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the escalating horror of my transformation and the desperate attempts to cling to the remnants of my former self. I barricaded myself in my room, refusing to venture out, afraid of what I might do, of what we might do. Food became repulsive, sleep a terrifying descent into nightmares that bled into waking hours. The whispers had returned, no longer a chorus of distant murmurs but a clear, distinct voice that resonated within my own skull. "Let go, Daniel," Eliza's voice cooed, her words echoing in my mind. "Embrace the change. Become who you were always meant to be." I fought back, desperately clinging to memories of my past, to the loved ones I had lost, to the life that had been stolen from me. But the memories were fading like photographs bleached by the sun, their colors muted, their details indistinct. Eliza's influence was growing stronger, her presence eclipsing my own. The house itself seemed to conspire against me, its architecture twisting and shifting, its shadows deepening and encroaching. The familiar hallways became labyrinthine corridors, the comforting silence transformed into an oppressive, mocking stillness. The Blackwood Manor was not merely a haunted house. It was a living entity, feeding on my fear, fueling my transformation, and tightening its grip on my soul. One afternoon, driven by a desperate need to prove that I was still in control, I decided to venture into the library. I hadn't been in there since my alteration. I hoped that the familiar surroundings, the scent of old paper and leather, might somehow ground me, might remind me of who I once was. As I entered the library, I was struck by a profound sense of wrongness. The books were no longer neatly arranged on the shelves, but scattered haphazardly across the floor. The antique furniture was overturned, the room in disarray. It looked as if a violent struggle had taken place. Then I saw her. Standing before the mirror, gazing at her reflection, was a figure that was both familiar and utterly alien. It was me, and yet it was. The figure in the mirror was a perfect replica of myself, but with a subtle, unsettling difference. Her eyes burned with Eliza's manic intensity, her lips curved with her predatory smile, her face radiating a chilling aura of malevolence. It was me possessed. The possessed version of myself turned slowly, her gaze locking with mine. A slow smile spread across her face, revealing a row of sharp, predatory teeth. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her voice a chilling echo of Eliza. "I've been waiting for you." I recoiled in horror, stumbling backward until I collided with a bookshelf. Books tumbled down around me, but I barely noticed. My gaze was fixed on the figure in the mirror, on the horrifying reflection of my own corrupted self. "What do you want?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this to me?" "I told you, Daniel," she said. "I want to save you, to free you from the pain, the suffering, the emptiness that has consumed you." She took a step toward me, her hand outstretched. "Join me, Daniel," she said. "Let us become one." I shook my head, desperately trying to resist her allure. "No," I said, "I won't let you. I won't let you destroy me." The possessed version of me laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that echoed through the library. "You have no choice, Daniel," she said. "You are already mine." She lunged at me, her skeletal fingers reaching for my face. I screamed, raising my arms to defend myself, but she was too fast, too strong. Her fingers grasped my face, her nails digging into my skin. A searing pain shot through my head, a blinding agony that threatened to consume me. I struggled against her, kicking and clawing, but it was no use. She was too powerful, her will overwhelming my own. As the pain intensified, I saw flashes of images in my mind: Eliza's life, her death, her endless torment within the walls of Blackwood Manor. I saw her desire for freedom, her desperate need for a vessel to escape her prison. And I saw her choosing me, selecting me as the perfect candidate for her possession. Then everything went black. I awoke on the floor of the library, my head throbbing, my body aching in every joint. The room was silent, the possessed version of myself gone. Had it all been a hallucination, a fevered dream brought on by the encroaching madness? I staggered to my feet and looked in the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, unchanged. But something was different. I could feel it. Eliza's presence within me, stronger than ever. Her will, her desires, her memories, they were all intertwined with my own, blurring the lines between our identities. I was no longer Daniel Thorne. I was no longer myself. I was a fusion, a twisted amalgamation of two souls trapped within a single body. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time, I saw Eliza Blackwood staring back at me. "Hello," I whispered, my voice a chilling blend of my own and hers. "We are home." I walked out of the library, my steps purposeful, my movements graceful. I knew what I had to do. It was time to embrace my destiny. It was time to become who I was always meant to be. It was time to set Blackwood Manor free. Chapter 7: The Ritual of Release. The fusion was intoxicating, a terrifying symphony of two minds intertwined. Eliza's memories became my own, her desires fueled my actions, her madness colored my perceptions. Yet, a sliver of my former self remained, a trapped and horrified observer within my own mind, forced to witness the unfolding horror. I roamed the halls of Blackwood Manor, no longer a prisoner but a master. The house responded to my will, its shadows dancing in anticipation, its silence humming with anticipation. I was Eliza Blackwood, and I was home. The library, once a sanctuary, now held no appeal. The books were mere relics of a past life, of a Daniel Thorne who no longer existed. My gaze was drawn to the attic, to the collection of antique dolls that Eliza had mentioned in her journal. They were grotesque, their porcelain faces cracked and chipped, their glass eyes staring blankly into the void. But they were more than mere toys. They were vessels, conduits for the dark energy that permeated Blackwood Manor. Eliza's journal entries detailing her attempts to contact the spirit world through seances and rituals now felt like memories. I knew what she wanted, what we needed to do. The ritual was the only way. I gathered the dolls and arranged them in a circle in the center of the attic. I lit candles, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. I chanted ancient incantations, words that I didn't know I knew, but that flowed effortlessly from my lips. As the ritual progressed, the air grew thick with energy. The dolls began to tremble, their glass eyes glowing with an eerie light. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a vortex, building to a deafening crescendo. The sliver of Daniel Thorne within me screamed in terror, begging me to stop, to break free from Eliza's control. But I was deaf to his pleas. I was consumed by the power, the madness, the irresistible pull of the ritual. Finally, the moment arrived. The climax of the ritual, the point of no return. I raised my arms, chanting the final incantation, and a bolt of lightning struck the house, illuminating the attic with a blinding flash of light. The dolls exploded, their porcelain fragments scattering across the room. A wave of energy surged through me, ripping through my body, tearing apart the last vestiges of my former self. I screamed, a primal, agonizing sound that echoed through Blackwood Manor. Then everything went silent. I stood in the attic, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight, my body trembling, my mind empty. I was no longer Daniel Thorne. I was no longer Eliza Blackwood. I was something else entirely. I walked to the window and looked out at the grounds. The trees swayed in the wind, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. The graveyard lay silent, its tombstones gleaming in the moonlight. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that revealed a row of sharp, predatory teeth. The ritual was complete. The barrier between worlds had been breached. The darkness had been unleashed. Blackwood Manor was free. I descended from the attic, my footsteps echoing through the silent house. I walked through the library, the ballroom, the hallways, each room now bathed in an ethereal glow. I reached the front door and opened it, stepping out into the night. The air was cold and crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I walked toward the graveyard, my steps purposeful, my movements graceful. As I approached the clearing, I saw figures emerging from the shadows. Ghosts, spirits, creatures of darkness, drawn to the power that now radiated from Blackwood Manor. They were my servants, my allies, my family. I smiled, welcoming them to our new world. We walked together through the grounds, our laughter echoing through the night. We were free at last. As dawn approached, I stood before Eliza's tombstone, gazing down at the weathered inscription. Eliza Blackwood, beloved wife and mother 1865 889 rest in peace. I reached out and touched the tombstone, a strange sense of satisfaction washing over me. You are free now, Eliza, I whispered. We are all free. I turned and walked away, leaving the graveyard behind. Blackwood Manor awaited, its doors open, its shadows beckoning. The ritual was complete, but the horror had only just begun. Chapter 8: The Spreading Rot. With Eliza fully ascendant, or rather, with the fusion complete, Blackwood Manor ceased to be merely a haunted house and became a nexus, a conduit for something far more ancient and malevolent than a restless spirit. The walls thrummed with unseen energy, the grounds writhed with unnatural life, and the very air crackled with a palpable sense of dread. The veil between realities had thinned, allowing glimpses of a darker dimension to bleed into our own. Or rather we, reveled in this newfound power. The ghosts and specters that haunted the grounds were no longer mere echoes of past tragedies, but extensions of our will, eager to serve, to corrupt, to spread the rot. The manor's influence began to seep outwards, tainting the surrounding landscape, poisoning the minds of those who dared to venture too close. The closest town, a sleepy, unassuming place called Havenwood, became our first target. Its inhabitants, content in their ignorance and complacency, were ripe for corruption. We began subtly, planting seeds of paranoia, stirring up old resentments and exploiting their deepest fears. Nightmares plagued their sleep, whispering doubts about their loved ones, their neighbors, their own sanity. Minor accidents became commonplace, attributed to clumsiness or bad luck, but carefully orchestrated to sow unease. The local animals began to behave strangely, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, their cries echoing through the night with a chilling dissonance. The town's history, previously celebrated, was subtly rewritten in their minds. Faded memories of tragic events, long since buried and forgotten, resurfaced, magnified and distorted. A long-ago mining accident that claimed the lives of several townspeople was no longer a regrettable tragedy but a deliberate act of sabotage, fueled by greed and corruption. A series of unsolved disappearances from decades past were no longer dismissed as runaways or accidental deaths, but attributed to a sinister cult that had secretly thrived within the town. One of the first to succumb was Sheriff Brody, a middle-aged man burdened by the weight of his responsibilities and haunted by the ghosts of his own past. He was a good man, a decent man, but his inherent anxieties made him easy prey. I enjoyed watching him fight his own mind. Eliza used visions to attack his already guilty conscience. He began seeing things that weren't there, shadows in the corners of his eyes, fleeting glimpses of spectral figures in the town square, whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of his office. He became increasingly isolated, consumed by paranoia, distrustful of everyone around him. His attempts to investigate the strange occurrences only fueled his descent into madness. He interviewed townspeople, piecing together fragmented accounts of unsettling events, but his efforts were dismissed as the ramblings of a man on the verge of a breakdown. His deputies, initially sympathetic, grew wary, questioning his judgment and his ability to perform his duties. We pushed him further, manipulating events to confirm his worst fears. A series of minor crimes, vandalism, petty theft, and animal mutilation, plagued the town, each incident carefully orchestrated to heighten the sense of unease and paranoia. The evidence, though circumstantial, pointed to a sinister force at work, a dark presence that was slowly corrupting Havenwood. Sheriff Brody's investigation led him to Blackwood Manor. He had heard the rumors, the whispers about the abandoned house on the outskirts of town, the stories of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances. He dismissed them as mere folklore, the product of overactive imaginations and local superstition. But as his sanity frayed, he couldn't dismiss his own instincts. He began to suspect the new owner, was behind everything. One night, armed with his service weapon and fueled by desperation, Sheriff Brody drove out to Blackwood Manor. He parked his patrol car at the end of the long, winding driveway and cautiously approached the house, his senses on high alert. I watched him from the window, a detached amusement mingling with a predatory anticipation. Daniel's moral compass, though twisted and fragmented, still flickered weakly, urging me to spare the man, to let him go. But Eliza's will was dominant. She wanted him, needed him, to further the spread of the rot. As Sheriff Brody reached the front door, it swung open, revealing me standing in the doorway, bathed in the ethereal glow of the house. "Sheriff Brody," I said, my voice a chilling blend of my own and Eliza. "What a pleasant surprise." The sheriff hesitated, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Thorne," he said, "I need to ask you a few questions." "Of course," I said, gesturing for him to enter. "Come in, let's talk." Sheriff Brody cautiously stepped inside, his hand resting on the handle of his service weapon. As he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him, plunging the hallway into darkness. Chapter 9: The Sheriff's Sacrifice. The darkness that engulfed the hallway was not merely the absence of light. It was a tangible presence, a suffocating blanket of fear and dread. Sheriff Brody instinctively reached for his flashlight, but his hand froze. A subtle, yet unmistakable, whisper slithered into his mind. "Don't," it hissed, a chilling echo of Eliza's voice. "The darkness is your friend." Brody ignored the whisper and fumbled for his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the hallway bathed in an eerie, ethereal glow. The portraits on the walls seemed to twist and contort, their eyes following him with malevolent interest. The air was heavy with the scent of mildew and decay, mingled with something else, something indefinable, yet deeply unsettling. I watched him, a predatory smile spreading across my face. Daniel's desperate pleas faded into a distant whimper. Now it was Eliza at the wheel. "He will be mine soon," said Eliza's influence. "What do you want, Thorne?" Brody said, his voice trembling slightly. "Why have you brought me here?" "I haven't brought you here, Sheriff," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed menace. "You came here of your own free will, drawn by the darkness that resides within you." Brody shook his head, trying to dismiss my words. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I just want some answers. I want to know what's been happening in Havenwood. The nightmares, the accidents, the disappearances." I chuckled, a low, seductive sound that sent shivers down his spine. "You already know the answers, Sheriff," I said. "You just haven't allowed yourself to accept them. The darkness is rising, Sheriff, and it's coming for Havenwood. It's already here." I took a step toward him, and Brody instinctively raised his weapon. "Stay back," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't want to hurt you." "Hurt me, Sheriff?" I laughed. "You can't hurt me. I am beyond hurt. I am hurt, Daniel, and I am now beyond you. I moved to the corner and grabbed a doll and held it against the wall. You think what happened with Sarah White was an accident, I said. No, it was your doing, said Brody. Sarah was meant to die to save her family from a greater pain. The guilt you harbor is of no use. You must release it. I continued getting closer to the sheriff. I know you regret your inaction, I said. Why don't you release those emotions, accept our way? The sheriff paused. I had gotten too close. I moved with great force onto the sheriff and hit his head against the wall. I hit him again. The sheriff was knocked out. I dragged the sheriff into the basement. I would release him from his human form. The other spirits of Blackwood Manor would feed off of him. I dragged the sheriff into the ritualistic circle in the basement. You think you can resist, but there is no saving you now, sheriff, I shouted. Chapter 10, The Feast Begins. The basement air hung thick and heavy, pregnant with the stench of mildew, damp earth, and a metallic tang that spoke of blood long spilled. The ritual circle, etched into the stone floor with faded symbols, pulsed with an eerie, ethereal light. Sheriff Brody lay unconscious within its confines, his body sprawled awkwardly, his face pale and slack. I gazed down at him, a detached curiosity mingling with a predatory anticipation. Eliza's influence surged, urging me to begin, to complete the transformation, to add another soul to the growing legion of Blackwood's spectral servants. Yet a flicker of Daniel's conscience remained, a desperate plea for mercy, for compassion. He knew the sheriff, he knew his family, he knew the pain that Havenwood would suffer if Brody were lost. But Eliza's will was absolute. Daniel was trapped, a powerless observer in his own body. I began the incantation, my voice resonating with an unearthly power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the manor. The air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and the symbols on the floor began to glow with increasing intensity. From the depths of the basement, spectral figures began to emerge, drawn by the power of the ritual and the promise of a fresh soul. They were the ghosts of Blackwood Manor, the tormented spirits of past inhabitants, their faces contorted with anguish and their eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. They gathered around the circle, their ethereal forms flickering and swirling, their whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. They reached out their spectral hands, their bony fingers grasping at Sheriff Brody's body, eager to begin their feast. Daniel's horror reached a fever pitch. He screamed within the confines of my mind, begging me to stop, to save the sheriff, to reclaim my own soul. But I was deaf to his pleas. I was Eliza Blackwood, and I had a destiny to fulfill. As the spectral figures descended upon Sheriff Brody, his body began to convulse. His eyes snapped open, his gaze filled with terror and confusion. He struggled against the spectral figures, his hands flailing, his body thrashing. "What's happening?" he stammered, his voice barely audible above the cacophony of whispers. "What are you doing to me?" I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that revealed a row of sharp, predatory teeth. "I'm setting you free, Sheriff," I said. "Free from the pain, the suffering, the emptiness that has consumed you. Embrace the darkness, Sheriff. Let it consume you, let it transform you." The spectral figures intensified their assault, their spectral hands tearing at Brody's flesh, their whispers invading his mind, their presence overwhelming his senses. His screams were deafening, a primal chorus of agony and despair that echoed through Blackwood Manor. He fought with every fiber of his being, but it was no use. The spectral figures were too strong, too numerous. Slowly, inevitably, Sheriff Brody began to succumb. His struggles grew weaker, his screams grew fainter, his body grew still. His eyes rolled back in his head and his face went slack. The spectral figures intensified their feast, their forms swirling and merging with Brody's body. His flesh began to decay, his bones began to crumble, and his soul began to unravel. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the feast ended. The spectral figures retreated, their bodies shimmering and fatting, their eyes glowing with satiated hunger. Sheriff Brody lay motionless within the circle, his body ravaged, his soul consumed. He was no longer a living man, but a mere husk, an empty vessel devoid of life and consciousness. I stepped into the circle and knelt beside him, my hand reaching out to touch his face. His skin was cold and clammy, his features distorted, his eyes vacant and lifeless. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor, Sheriff," I whispered. "You are home now." As I spoke those words, a faint flicker of light appeared in Brody's eyes. His lips twitched, and a faint whisper escaped his throat. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. Then his eyes went dark and his body went still. Sheriff Brody was gone, and something new had taken his place. A spectral figure rose from his body, its form shimmering and translucent, its face contorted with anguish and despair. But in its eyes, a flicker of something else, a hunger, a malevolence, a desire to spread the rot. The ghost of Sheriff Brody had joined the legion of Blackwood's spectral servants. And the feast had only just begun. Chapter 11. The Whispers of Havenwood. The news of Sheriff Brody's disappearance sent a wave of panic through Havenwood. The close-knit community, already fractured by the creeping paranoia and unexplained incidents, was thrown into a state of chaos. The deputies, initially skeptical of their boss's erratic behavior, were forced to confront the possibility of a genuine threat. I, of course, reveled in the unfolding drama, delighting in the fear and uncertainty that consumed the town. The spreading rot was taking root, its tendrils reaching out, poisoning the very heart of Havenwood. The deputies, lacking a leader and desperate for answers, began their own investigation. They questioned the townsfolk, reviewed old case files, and scoured the local area for any sign of their missing colleague. But their efforts were hampered by the mounting evidence of a larger conspiracy, the whispers of a supernatural force, of Blackwood Manor's influence, that most were unwilling to acknowledge. I, through my control over Brody's spirit, began to manipulate their investigation from beyond the grave. Through their dreams, their fears, and their deepest insecurities, I guided their actions, planting false clues, leading them down dead ends, and sowing discord among their ranks. I was enjoying the power. It was a dark joy, but a joy nonetheless. Daniel was now just a small voice in the back, barely audible. His strength was gone. Havenwood was mine to take. Brody's former home now became the center of their investigation. It was the deputies who went to my door. They stood, two young deputies, scared and unsure, with the old deputy, now a shell of his former self. I opened the door and greeted them with a smile, my eyes shining with a dark light. "Sheriff Brody's friends, are you? You're a little late to the party," I said. They looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and fear. "We need to ask you some questions." "Oh, by all means, come in. I have nothing to hide," I said, waving my hands and gesturing them inside. As they entered Blackwood Manor, the atmosphere shifted, the darkness intensified, and the whispers became a cacophony. They were surrounded by an oppressive sense of dread. I led them into the library, where the air was thick with the scent of old paper and decaying leather. The room was a carefully curated display of the Blackwood family's history, each item subtly imbued with a touch of the darkness. The deputies exchanged nervous glances, their eyes darting across the room. They were beginning to feel the effects of Blackwood Manor. "Now, what can I do for you?" I asked, my voice dripping with honeyed menace. "We're looking for Sheriff Brody," one of the deputies said, his voice trembling. "We heard he came to see you." "Ah, yes, the sheriff," I said. "He was here, a troubled man burdened by the weight of the world." "What happened to him?" the other deputy asked. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that revealed a row of sharp, predatory teeth. "He found peace," I said. "He embraced the darkness. He is home now." The deputies looked at each other in horror. "What are you talking about?" one of them said. "I'm talking about the truth, Sheriff. The truth about Blackwood Manor, the truth about Havenwood. "Sheriff, I think it's time to go. This person is insane," said one of the deputies. Then, as I spoke, the room began to shift. The shelves of books swayed, the portraits on the walls twisted, and the shadows danced, forming grotesque shapes. The deputies gasped, their faces contorted with terror. "No," one shouted and reached for his gun. "You cannot leave, gentlemen. This town is no longer yours," I said. "You're insane," said the old deputy. I looked at him and Brody started speaking, his voice my own. "Yes, I am. You should have listened to me." Then the ghost of Brody manifested around me. It was a twisted visage of the sheriff. He was a puppet of the dark force, the force that was now me. "You have been warned," I screamed, and then with the spectral sheriff I pounced. Chapter 12, Havenwood's Fall. The library exploded into chaos. The young deputies, armed but terrified, fired their weapons blindly into the spectral figure that had materialized around me, bullets tearing through the air, ripping through the ancient books, and shattering the antique furniture. But their shots were useless, the bullets passing harmlessly through the ethereal form of the ghostly sheriff. I laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that echoed through the library. "You cannot kill what is already dead," I taunted, my voice a chilling blend of my own and Brody. The ghostly sheriff lunged forward, his spectral hands grasping at the deputies, his touch sending a wave of icy dread through their bodies. They screamed, stumbling backward, their weapons falling from their trembling hands. I watched with detached amusement as the deputies succumbed to the terror, their minds fracturing under the weight of the encroaching darkness. They were easy prey, their fears and insecurities magnified by the power of Blackwood Manor. One of the deputies, a young woman named Sarah, managed to break free from the ghostly sheriff's grasp. She scrambled to her feet and fled from the library, her footsteps echoing through the silent house. "Run, Sarah, run," I whispered, my voice dripping with honeyed menace. "But you cannot escape Blackwood Manor. You cannot escape your destiny." I turned my attention to the remaining deputy, a young man named Mark. He was frozen in place, his eyes wide with terror, his body trembling uncontrollably. "It's time, Mark," I said, my voice growing softer, more seductive. "It's time to join us, to embrace the darkness, to become who you were always meant to be." Mark shook his head, desperately trying to resist my influence. "No," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I won't let you destroy me." "You have no choice, Mark," I said. "You are already mine." I reached out my hand, my fingers beckoning him closer. He tried to resist, but it was no use. My will was too strong, his resistance too weak. He took a step toward me, his eyes glazed over, his body moving like a puppet on a string. "That's it, Mark," I said. "Come closer, closer." As he drew nearer, I felt Eliza's presence within me, her hunger intensifying, her desire for a new vessel growing stronger. It was time to complete the transformation, to add another soul to the growing legion of Blackwood's spectral servants. With a swift movement, I grasped Mark's face, my fingers digging into his skin. A searing pain shot through his head, a blinding agony that brought him to his knees. He screamed, a primal, agonizing sound that echoed through the library. Then everything went silent. I released Mark's face, and he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing, his eyes rolling back in his head. The ghostly sheriff materialized beside me, his spectral hands reaching out to claim his new victim. As the ghostly sheriff descended upon Mark, his body began to shimmer and fade, his consciousness dissolving into the darkness. He was no longer a living man but a mere echo, a spectral puppet controlled by my will. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that revealed a row of sharp, predatory teeth. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor, Mark," I whispered. "You are home now." With Mark now under my control, I turned my attention to Sarah, the fleeing deputy. I could sense her fear, her desperation, her fading hope. She was running through the grounds, her footsteps pounding against the earth, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I summoned the ghostly sheriff and Mark, and we set out in pursuit. We were the hunters, and Sarah was the prey. As we stalked Sarah through the grounds, I could feel the power of Blackwood Manor growing stronger, its influence spreading outwards, corrupting everything it touched. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. The shadows deepened, forming grotesque shapes, their whispers swirling around us like a ghostly embrace. The town of Havenwood was falling. As we closed in on Sarah, I could sense the darkness taking hold of the town. The nightmares intensified, the accidents grew more frequent, and the disappearances became more brazen. The townsfolk were succumbing to paranoia and fear, their minds fracturing, their souls unraveling. Havenwood was becoming a reflection of Blackwood Manor, a twisted, corrupted version of its former self. It was a testament to my power, to Eliza, Will, to the spreading rot that was consuming everything in its path. And I was just getting started. The end.